So are we recording now?
Yes, we're recording.
And you guys are going to change my voice and everything, right? I don't want anybody to know that I was here.
Yes, now, do you remember where you were during the event?
Yeah, I remember. I don't know how I'm ever going to forget. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, I think. I got a text from my friend. Sorry, that was them again. I'll turn my phone off. Sorry. I knew it must be a big deal if they were texting me that early in the morning, but it just said to check Twitter. And so I did. That's when I saw it. You know, I'm sorry. There are some things you don't forget. 9/11, assassination of JFK, birth of your first child. But me, I don't know how I'm ever gonna forget where I was when I found out that Nora Neko was streaming herself shitting.
We apologize if that was upsetting to some of our more sensitive viewers. What you have just heard is an eyewitness account of one of the most shocking examples of anti-content to date. Anti-content and anti-idols have taken the internet by storm in recent years. While they may seem shocking to some, there is a clear set of events that have brought us to this point. I hope you will join me in this investigative report to trace the history of content, idols, and their mirror universe equivalents. Okay, hold the phone. That right there is an imposter. Anti-Ricki. Don't believe me? Just look at this photo. Look, there's a lot that we can say about anti-content and anti-idols, but honestly, I'm starting to think that they might not even exist. They're like ethical consumption under capitalism. To actually understand that, though, we're going to need to wind back the clock and look at the very beginning of the Japanese idol industry. The term idol began to emerge in Japan following the 1963 release of the French film Cherchez l'idole, meaning in search of an idol, or find the idol. However, it wasn't until 1971, almost a full decade later, that Minami Sayori, Amachi Mari, and Kyoangiri Umiko debuted as the group Sannin Musume, meaning 3 young girls. They presented themselves as relatable and approachable in contrast to the incredibly beautiful and talented, larger-than-life celebrities that they were competing with for attention. And that girl-next-door image made it easier for fans to identify with them and form parasocial relationships. Can we get a link down there to the parasocial relationships video? It's pretty good. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. A+, I highly recommend. Anyway, throughout the 1970s, more idols debuted, with some 700 different idols debuting between 1971 to 1975 alone. And that rising popularity created an entire media industry. The 1980s marked a golden era for the Japanese idol industry as the nation's economy transitioned to a post-industrial bubble situated around information and media. It also meant the death of quote-unquote stars, as the more relatable idols, in part because of the parasocial investment of fans, won the war for attention. And so, as the Japanese media and entertainment industry matured, so too did the idol industry. Idols became regular fixtures on television via variety shows and product endorsements and commercials. Agencies also continued to pull in and refine prospective talent as that industry became an increasingly central component of the Japanese entertainment market. As the golden age came to a close and the 1990s dawned, the landscape of idols began to change in some key ways. Idol groups, in particular, became more prominent, especially Morning Musume and then later on AKB48. This is important for a number of reasons. Groups are able to appeal to a wider audience than individual performers alone. Look, some people like sporty idols, some people like scary idols, some people like posh idols. You get the idea. This also puts less emphasis on the skills of any one idol, making them easier to replace. The producers of Morning Musume realized this and decided to make frequent turnover a feature of the group. This is where we get the term graduation from, where a performer leaves the group and then is usually replaced later on. Frequent graduations open the doors for big events and spectacles as the member departs, while also allowing the group to refocus and adjust to target new emerging market trends. So the question then becomes, how many idols can you replace before the group is no longer the same group? Apparently, the answer is all of them. And it doesn't really matter all that much, in fact. And that's it, folks. We solved the ship of Theseus, and we're only like 5 minutes into the video. AKB48 in particular stood out among their competition by capitalizing on the emotional investment of fans like no group before them and maybe like no group since. During the 90s, when album sales were in decline, AKB48 encouraged their fans to buy multiple copies of the same CD over and over again. Take, for example, the group's 8th single, which came packaged with 44 different versions of a poster. Now, the fans that collected all 44 versions were invited to attend an exclusive event. It's like Willy Wonka, but you had to buy enough chocolate bars to get at least 44 different golden tickets, and then you get to go to the chocolate factory where the Oompa Loompas are idols or something, and, we're not going to go here. This is already getting uncomfortably close to something real. They've also done similar promotion by packaging tickets to handshake events or votes in popularity contests, also known as the general election, along with their CDs, and then marketed it with taglines like, "Your votes are your love." And if this sounds kind of fucked up to you, maybe a little bit manipulative, maybe a lot of bit exploitative, put a pin in that, because we're going to come back to this one real soon. The 2010s and on have become the warring state period of idols. Idols are a ubiquitous factor in daily life. They're everywhere from TV shows to baseball games to subway billboards. Mainstream idol groups, however, are built out of a rotating stable of deliberately interchangeable performers that have been produced to fill the girl next door media archetype. Eventually, though, you start to hit a point of market saturation. And this is where alternative idols or anti-idols come into the picture. And in particular, I want to focus on two groups, Baby Metal and Brand New Idol Society, or BIS. Both BIS and Baby Metal emerged in the early 2010s and deviated massively from the established mold of what an idol should be. Remember, idols are public figures. They're supposed to be wholesome role models. BIS, however, was formed with the goal of lampooning contradictions and absurdities in the idol industry. They pulled punk influences into both their image and music. They appeared seemingly naked in music videos, including one where they run through Aokigahara, which is colloquially referred to in English media as the suicide forest, and all around rebelled against this corny image of purity that had been employed to enormous success by other groups. Now, when they transitioned into a major label, they actually rebranded as a publicity stunt to have a more conventional idol image, including imploring their fans to buy the same CD over and over again, before dropping that image like a Scooby-Doo villain tearing off their own mask. Baby Metal, on the other hand, emerged directly out of another idol group, Sakura Gakuin. The group was formed around the concept of a school where different subunits would be represented by different clubs. Baby Metal, for example, was the heavy music club. Now, given the school club theming, members were also expected to graduate when they graduated junior high in their day-to-day lives. Following Suzuka Nakamoto's graduation, Baby Metal began in earnest, dropping their self-titled album the following year. Now, as a group, Baby Metal performs with a live backing band, and they pull in metal and gothic Lolita influences into their aesthetic and visuals. And now, while their sound isn't without precedence, actually, they have a fair bit in common with visual key groups like Duran Gray. Can I get a quick date check? When did Withering to Death come out? That long ago, huh? Oh god, I got old, didn't I? Well, anyway. The clash of idol culture and metal influences propelled Baby Metal to rapid international stardom. So now that we've defined idols and how BIS and Baby Metal challenge idol culture, surely they must be examples of alternative or anti-idols, right? See, I'm not so sure. Let's take Baby Metal, for example. Prior to the creation of the group, none of the members had listened to metal music before. Their group was the brainchild of their producer and noted Skullomania cosplayer Koba Metal. This isn't to comment on their artistic ability or integrity. Personally, I think they whip ass. And even if I didn't, who am I to question the ringing endorsement of one Mr. Robert Zombie? Burn through the what now? Am I in danger? But there is something to consider here in terms of what anti-idol or alternative idol is. Even BIS has gone through multiple rebrandings and member rotations. In their most recent incarnation, it's getting harder to pinpoint how the group is substantively different from other idol groups outside of aesthetic choices. Both groups have also inspired a number of other performers, so they are still idolized and admired despite transgressing against the girl next door image employed by other mainstream groups. Moreover, those subsequent groups that have followed in their footsteps have had to ratchet up the shock value of their performances to highlight how exactly they are different from the groups that have come before them. And so now we have alt-idol groups that will sing about how much they love Donald Trump. And that is definitely a sentence that I just said in the year of our Lord and Savior, Luigi Mario 2022. Look, you see this in other media as well. What was alternative just becomes mainstream over time. So performers have to keep upping the ante in order to stay interesting. Just look at old cop shows like Columbo, and then contrast it against a more recent show like CSI Miami. And as much as I set out to make this video about the history of anti-idols, I've been left thinking that maybe those differences are more aesthetic than anything else, and that the industry will eventually adjust itself against any temporary transgressions and eventually turn them into subgenres if they prove to be popular enough. But there is a parallel story that I do want to talk about that occurs around the same time as the maturation of the idol industry, and that's the internet and content creation. If you're like me, you might be familiar with the term net idol. If you're unlike me, you'd be willing to admit that the first time that you came across that term was while you were reading a copy of Negima in the back of a Borders. You see, net idols were independent idols that connected with their fans via, well, you guessed it, it's the internet. You see, before social media, they might run a blog site where they would post photos and updates about themselves. Without the backing of large agencies and the resources that would go along with that support, net idols typically had a core audience of 10 to 30 people who would form the core of their fan base. But nowadays, the term net idol is actually pretty antiquated, and the heyday of net idols fizzled out around the mid to late 2000s around the emergence of social media sites like Facebook and MySpace. Nowadays, though, net idols, or the people who might have been net idols in the days of yonder, go by a different name, and we call them content creators. While researching this video, I went looking for a definition of content that I liked, and it turned out to be a surprisingly difficult task. So I'm just going to do what all great academics do and use the Wikipedia definition but lie about it. Content is information produced and directed at an end user or audience in the sectors of publishing, art, and communication. So if we want to break that down, content is something that is produced with an audience in mind. Now, interestingly, and also personally, I have a hard time back-labeling pre-internet works as content. I don't think of things like Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, the Mona Lisa, or David Lynch's 1984 classic Dune as content, even though technically they fit that definition. So I'm going to add one more piece onto that definition and say that content is something that is delivered either exclusively or primarily via the internet. And thanks to the internet, the barrier for entry is lower than ever for being able to reach an audience. You don't need the backing and the capital of a major production group anymore. The audiences of 10 to 30 that ye old net idols would have reached now look more like 10 to 30,000. And on platforms like TikTok, viral posts can reach audiences in the millions in under a day or two. The potential for outreach incentivizes creators to produce works with mass appeal in mind. So content is frequently fun, accessible, and does little to challenge the target audience. And if that's the definition of content that I'm going to go with, then anti-content is something that is posted primarily to the internet, that is designed to be opaque, challenging, or in some way inaccessible. So let's talk about YouTube poops. YouTube poops are an expansive genre of video content posted to, well, YouTube. They are video shitposts that repurpose existing footage via remixes with the intention of creating something new that is humorous, surreal, or sometimes just obnoxious. Common techniques in this genre include using video clips from cartoons, distorting audio, using audio or visual loops, 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 having weird zooms, or just generally out of place special effects. So with that inherent inaccessibility in mind, this has to be an example of anti-content, right? Once again, I am not so sure. YouTube poops have become so popular that it is now a genre large enough to have offshoot subgenres like YouTube poop music videos or YTP MVs. There is a dedicated base of creators and fans for these videos, and many of them have reached millions of viewers. So despite apparently being designed without mass appeal in mind, the novelty of lacking mass appeal has actually looped back around and propelled YouTube poops into being really a cornerstone of the culture of YouTube. And now that you have dedicated content creators producing videos for this target audience, that doesn't necessarily sound like anti-content to me, that just sounds like content. But what about the world outside of YouTube? Surely anti-content has to exist there, right? So if you take a look over to the world of streaming, sleeping streams have actually become quite popular lately. On the surface, you would think this is anti-content, because after all, the streamer isn't doing anything. Imagine tuning into a popular broadcaster, like me, who is known for producing engaging content, like me, and is never ever scuffed. Okay, that one's not like me. But they're not doing anything in the broadcast, they're just sleeping. And yet, these streams can be incredibly popular despite their lack of overt appeal. In fact, actually, some streamers can make a fair bit of money while sleeping just by being on camera while doing it. So how does this work? How can we parse this in our brains? Well, in part, when viewers tune in expecting some kind of engagement or something more traditionally content-like, and then they don't find that, it creates a sense of dissonance. And especially if this is a person that they know is very funny and they expect to be entertained by, well, that absence of overt appeal kind of feeds back in and becomes a sort of ironic spectacle. And I'm sure that if we give it some time, we're going to see a globally trending 24/7 live stream of paint drying with no other audio, and yet still, I don't know if I would say that is necessarily anti-content. Now, there is a counterpoint that could be made here. You might be thinking to yourself, hey Ricki, you're missing something. All of these examples are passive in their anti-contentedness. What about something that is a more direct opposition to the content creation machine, that is louder and more overt in its attempt to be anti-content? All right, I see ya. Let's talk about getting over it for a second. Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is my favorite game. It's a weird little title where you play as a guy in a pot and you try to swing your hammer and get up a mountain. It's infamously frustrating because small mistakes can cost you large amounts of hard-earned progress. Along the way, the creator of the game and my personal hero, Bennett Foddy, monologues his thoughts about content and culture, so allow me to read to you a section from that monologue. Things are made to be consumed and used in a certain context, and once the moment is gone, they transform into garbage. In the context of technology, those moments pass by in seconds. Over time, we've poured more and more refuse into this vast digital landfill that we call the internet. It now vastly outnumbers and outweighs the things that are fresh and untainted and unused. When everything around us is cultural trash, trash becomes the new medium, the lingua franca of the digital age. And you can build culture out of trash, but only trash culture. Be games, be movies, be music, be philosophy. Maybe this is what digital culture is. A monstrous mountain of trash, the ash heap of creativity's fountain, a landfill with everything we ever thought of in it, grand, infinite, and unsorted. The actual text of the game is a commentary on the disposable nature of content in the digital age. As you climb, you eventually realize that the mountain you've been climbing is covered in garbage. And yet, when you go to YouTube and you search for Getting Over It, you'll find mostly reaction videos and rage compilations. The subgenre of games that have followed getting over it have mostly keyed into the frustration and potential loss of progress, and not the overarching message of the game. The content machine do be always churning, and it will take even direct commentary and turn it into the most banal and easily consumed form. Another recent example is needy streamer overload. Using mechanics drawn from the raising subgenre like Monster Rancher and Princess Maker, you play as the partner of an aspiring internet idol. The goal of the game is to coach her into becoming a viral sensation with millions of adoring fans. However, the game is set up to make the player question whether or not that is actually a worthwhile goal. The things that grow your following the fastest are also going to put the most stress on your partner's mental health. She even has a mental darkness stat. You, as her partner, have to encourage her to do things that you know will negatively impact her mental health so that the two of you can grow your following, make rent, and avoid eviction. At every step, the game is making you question whether the pursuit of fame in the age of the internet is healthy for basically anyone. And if that isn't enough, if her mental darkness stat is too low for too long, she just up and quits streaming. Look, I know writers that use subtext, and they are cowards. And even if you stay on your grind and you make it as a creator, it isn't necessarily a happy ending that's waiting for you. I know this is a recent game, but I do expect that history tends to repeat itself, but we'll see what happens and what the internet ends up doing with it. At the start of this video, I promised to chart a history of how there is a very logical progression that takes us from the inception of Japanese idol culture in the 1970s to Norineko streaming herself shitting. So let's go ahead and do that. Take me to the corkboard. Alright, buckle up. We're gonna do this thing. Alright. The Japanese idol industry grew and matured from the 1970s through the early 2000s. As the market reached saturation during what we now call the Warring States period of idols in the early 2010s, savvy producers realized that there were large untapped markets that most groups were ignoring. So they started aiming their talent at market demographics outside of the norm by pulling in different genre influences. And this is how we ended up with baby metal, and to an extent how we ended up with Brand New Idol Society, since they were reacting to a lot of the absurdity and inherent contradictions that had come about in the idol industry. Now, outside of those agencies, indie net idols were attracting small but dedicated audiences, and the explosion of content creation and the inception of social media proved that the internet was actually also a massive untapped market. And this would eventually attract the attention of larger agencies, and this is how we get groups like Hololive and Nijisanji. Now, normally, idols are recruited very young and trained rigorously for many years before debuting. However, that wasn't possible here. These companies started pulling in from the bank of existing content creators, meaning that the talent joining these groups wouldn't always fit the established mold of an idol. Remember that wholesome or girl next door image. In fact, many of them are weird, offbeat, awkward, introverted, and just generally all around quality entertainers. You might even be incensed to call them alternative idols. Just as with any kind of media, what was subversive eventually becomes normal, maybe even expected. You gotta keep pushing the envelope to stay fresh and hold the attention of viewers. So with all these factors in mind, someone streaming while they're taking a shit isn't just understandable. It feels inevitable. 50 years of history and $1 billion entertainment industry converged at this moment. Everything that is, and everything that ever was, has taken humanity to this one singular moment of history. Across all possible multiverses, this moment was inevitable. Prometheus stole fire from the gods so that this virtual cat could take a shit on the internet. But back to the broader point of this video, is this really anti-content or an example of an anti-idol? I would argue not. And as of the writing of this script, the poop stream has over 200,000 views. Fumino Tamaki, aka Norineko herself, is part of a large agency. Virtual YouTubers or VTubers have even started to overtake their real-world idol counterparts. And even though they can differ shockingly from the traditional girl next door image, virtual idols are everywhere, from TV shows to baseball games to subway billboards. Look, Here's the CEO of Cover throwing the opening pitch at a baseball game in front of cutouts of members of Hololive, including, Zoom, Enhance, the pirate that advertised a PC that would play sounds of herself moaning when you plug something into a USB slot. And as subversive as that might seem, it's just mainstream pop culture now. You know, Disco Elysium put it pretty well. Capital has the ability to subsume all critiques into itself. Even those who would critique capital end up reinforcing it instead. So, is it even possible then for anti-idol or anti-content to exist? Maybe. But I don't think it's possible on the internet. Platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, and more are built to push content to targeted audiences as a way of driving revenue. And even direct criticism of this system is looped back around into content. I could record a 10-hour looping video saying, do not like, comment, or subscribe. 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 And folks still would do it. And what about art? Is it possible for art to exist in this system? Well, in the words of Michel Duchamp, who I have another video about if you want to check that one out, or I get more into the weeds on this kind of stuff, if I call it art, it's art. But whether something is art is up to the creator. If you're just putting up something onto YouTube so you don't fall out of the algorithm, or letting the algorithm determine what you're making, well, then that's probably not art. Regardless of your intention, though, once your work hits these platforms, it'll be put through discovery algorithms, engagement metrics, and more. At the end of the day, these platforms do exist to make money and have been very well designed to turn everything that comes into contact with them into something that can make money. But I want to end on a more hopeful note, because I do actually think that anti-content and anti-idols can exist. This is Old Survivor. This is the last old-growth redwood in Oakland, California. Shows up a lot in Jenny Odell's very excellent book, How to Do Nothing, and also in my reading series on it. It is only still around because of the combination of its odd shape and inaccessible location. As loggers were coming through the area and clearing out the other old-growth redwoods, they left Old Survivor alone because it wasn't profitable to cut it down. And there's a lesson there. I think that Old Survivor is proof that there are some things in this world that cannot be co-opted by capitalism. This tree here may be the first real example of an actual anti-idol. And I didn't say at the end of the wrestling video, so let me just close on one more point here. The problem is 100% capitalism. Well, that's the end. Huge thanks to everyone that's given me feedback and encouragement on these projects, or even just made sure that the horny pirate computer system voice wasn't just a fever dream that I had. Enormous, super huge thanks to the academics and journalists that I was able to pull from with all the sections about the idol industry. This video did take longer than I expected because I decided to learn live 2D animation and reanimate my model partway through production. It does mean a lot to me though that folks enjoy these videos and sometimes might even learn something from them. So if you got questions or comments or anything, you can try to leave them below and I'll do my best to respond to them. I'm not sure when my next bigger video is going to be or what it's even going to be about, but if something you're curious about or you got a burning interest in, drop it. Maybe I do too. But until then, take care of yourselves and take care of the people around you too. After all, each other is all we got on this big weird spinning space rock. Bye.